Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest of the Legionaries of Christ and a theology professor. This is a podcast on the Starcrest Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we're on day 356. We have only like 10 days left. This is getting right to the end. Today we're covering Gaudium et Spes, paragraph 80, and it's about modern weapons made war worse. There's a certain emphasis on nukes here and other kind of city-destroying weapons. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican or frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. Yesterday, we spoke about how war can be more brutal now, and we need to respect natural law and international agreements. Today, we continue Chapter 5, the foster of peace and the promotion of a community of nations. We keep going through Section 1, the avoidance of war. And our summary today is that it is a crime against God and man to bomb cities. In the middle of this paragraph, you have one of the most definitive declarations in this document, Gaudium et Spes. There are 5 subparagraphs, and we'll read them in 3 parts. A and B talk about how these new weapons are ethically problematic. C and D pretty clearly define that we cannot attack whole cities during war. And then E talks about how we need to be aware of the dangers that modern weapons bring to military decision-making. So let's begin with 80A and B. A. The horror and perversity of war is immensely magnified by the addition of scientific weapons. For acts of war involving these weapons can inflict massive and indiscriminate destruction, thus going far beyond the bounds of legitimate defense. Indeed, if the kind of instruments which can now be found in the armies of the great nations were to be employed to their fullest, an almost total and altogether reciprocal slaughter on each side by the other would follow, not to mention the widespread devastation that would take place in the world, and the deadly after effects that would be spawned by the use of weapons of this kind. B. All these considerations compel us to undertake an evaluation of war with an entirely new attitude. The men of our time must realize that they will have to give a somber reckoning of their deeds of war, for the course of the future will depend greatly on the decisions they make today. So here, the Council Fathers are obviously against nuclear weapons, but they're also against other kinds of massive weapons. They talk about them as scientific weapons. They don't use the word nuclear, but that is clearly the context. These weapons create destruction of civilians well beyond legitimate defense. And they guarantee that many, many innocent people will be killed in this war. This is against the idea of mutually assured destruction that the U.S. and the Soviets operated on for much of the Cold War, where basically as a defense they would say, well, we will have enough nukes that will destroy you. That is the problem of, like, if you actually go through with it. While you stay in balance, okay, but then if balance comes out of balance, oh my goodness, we have, millions of people dead. And what they're asking here is, 20 years after, how can we think differently? How can we change our attitude after the slaughter, the horrendous situation of World War II? We need to think about it more somberly now. Subparagraphs C and D talk about how we can't attack cities in war, and it's a pretty clear declaration. Let's begin. ADC. With these truths in mind, this most holy synod makes its own condemnation of total war, already pronounced by recent popes, and issues the following declaration. D. Any act of war aimed indiscriminately at the destruction of entire cities of extensive areas along with their population is a crime against God and man himself. It merits unequivocal and unhesitating condemnation. This comes down like a clear dogmatic definition. Now, it is not declare a new dogma or anything like that, but the clarity with which it has is, and the kind of declaration and the words around it, make it especially important. So let's read it again. Any act of war aimed indiscriminately at the destruction of entire cities, of extensive areas along with their population, is a crime against God and man himself. This is a clear declaration that we cannot attack cities in war. Cities are where civilians live. One of the principles of just war is to prevent, so far as possible, civilian deaths. Destroying a whole city does the opposite of that. It is a crime against God, a crime against man. I know this can be tough, especially for Americans, to accept that Hiroshima and Nagasaki were unquestionably immoral, bombing those two cities with atomic bombs. And it wasn't just them. It was the bombings that were immoral from the beginning. The German bombing of London, the bombing of Dresden, the bombing of Tokyo. All of these cities were bombed indiscriminately, killing many, many civilians. This had been mentioned by previous popes, but not in such a formal official matter. And it had been known and taught in Catholic moral theology well before the Second World War. So we can't claim ignorance for anyone who had studied Catholic moral theology and gave instructions to them, to those who carried out these things, the ethics, to the military commanders, whatever. These types of destruction are horrendous. They cannot be repeated. And that's important to note. We are not just saying, it's kind of bad. No, absolutely, undeniably, unequivocally, no. So, moving on to our last subsection today, which will be text E. We need to be aware of the danger modern weapons bring into military decision-making. After this subsection, I'm just going to have a brief comment on new weapons that have been developed in the last 50, 60 years that are not envisioned by those who wrote Vatican II, those who participate in the council, so worth noting. E. The unique hazard of modern warfare consists in this. It provides those who possess modern scientific weapons with a kind of occasion for perpetrating such abominations. Moreover, through a certain inexorable chain of events, it can catapult men into the most atrocious decisions. Thus, such may never truly happen in the future. The bishops of the whole world gathered together, beg all men, especially government officials and military leaders, to give unremitting thought to their gigantic responsibility for God and the entire human race. The type of weapons modify military decision-making, and that's what the Council Fathers are getting at here. And these modern weapons that can destroy whole cities really can lead to bad choices, can lead to this inexorable chain of events. We don't know exactly what the things were set during the Cold War, but it could have been set with this little hair trigger, and some misfire by somebody on the Russian or American side could have resulted in hundreds of millions or hundreds of millions even of deaths. And the bishops, priests like myself, etc., need to help teach people about their moral choice in these things. Now, a little modern note about weapons. Weapons have gone a very different direction since World War II. In about the 1960s, when they had this here, you had, Casa Bravo or a few others. They had the biggest bombs ever, were detonated right before or around Vatican II. But after that, what did the militaries do? They said, wait a second. It's more effective if we have weapons that are super precise. And they have gotten incredibly much more precise, which is actually good because a lot less civilians are killed. I'm currently in my bedroom/office while I'm recording this. Pretty not too big of a room. And with modern 21st century weapons, with one bomb, they can be 99.9% sure they're going to hit this room. With the weapons of World War II, they would have had to drop thousands and thousands of bombs to be 99.9% sure they destroyed this room. That's something valuable. However, there are two modern dangers which are not addressed here. The first one, which is lesser, is the kind of impersonalization that can happen with drone warfare, where these American or other developed nations, people who are sitting there in these air-conditioned rooms flying drones, it can almost seem like a video game, and they can lose the sense of the gravity of it. Even more concerning, which is not developed yet but is on the verge and might come in the near future, is AI warfare, where there's no longer even a human trigger on the trigger, and AI operates on its own and kills people in battle. That would be a huge issue. Thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast, and you can donate to help Starcrest produce it and other great podcasts at sqpn.com/give. You can give one-time monthly to join the Starcrest Patreon. Tomorrow we're going to continue with the next paragraph of Gaudium Spes. Paragraph 81 on the arms race is concerning. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which can provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. Go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X for more information on the podcast. We've also set up an email for questions and comments at Vatican2@sqpn.com. And my own website, frmatthewlc.com, has a contact form. Amen.